Okay, hello and welcome. I am so pleased today to have Claudia Arnowitz. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. That's perfect.
Claudia Arnowitz, and she's a personal development and relationship coach, and really a communications coach, I would say. Isn't that's kind of your specialty, isn't it, Claudia?
It is, absolutely.
And so what we're going to do is talk about communication, especially in the context of divorce, and how to make it work, which is challenging for sure. So I'm so glad and honored to have an expert here who can help us. Most of the divorces, they kind of look like this, right, Claudia, where people are back to back, and we're going to talk about how you can communicate, because especially if you have children, you need to find ways to communicate. So why don't you talk about what we're going to cover today?
So first of all, thank you, Brian, for having me. It's really a pleasure to be able to share my knowledge on, how do you communicate with yourself and then learn how to communicate with others. And this is important for any type of relationship. And it's extremely important when relationships are stressed and when you're in this divorce, but somehow still have to talk to the person. So how can you do it better? And what can you learn as you're going to move forward to the next stage of your life? And you can maybe do, different, not the same mistakes that you did, but different ones, and learn from what happened. So we're going to do two things today. One is just, I want to give you a little bit of background on how our minds work when we communicate, because I think it's important to know that we all work the same way in certain things and what is there. And then I chose tools. There's many different tools I could have teach you, and I could talk for hours, but I chose tools that I believe are in our control. Things that it doesn't matter what's happening in your life right now and what stage you're in your separation, you can start using them to communicate more effectively and to have a different outcome than what you're having right now.
Excellent. Well, that'll be great to leave people with some ways that they can implement in their daily life. That's what we're looking for, some practical advice. So let's look at the brain. That looks pretty complicated.
It is a very complicated slide. And, a lot of people tell me, you should take that out. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to take it out, because I'm not going to spend here 10 minutes and I'm going to spend one. But I want people to understand one thing. Our brain has different parts, and depending how we feel and the hormones that are secreted in our body, we use a different part in our brain. So we do have a neurological physical reaction that permits us either to listen or not to listen, either to communicate properly or not to communicate properly. And that's why a lot of times people say, oh, I wish I hadn't said that. And I just got so triggered. I said so many things that I'm sorry I did. This is exactly why it happens. So we have two major parts of our brain. We have the part in front of our brain, the frontal cortex, that's where we can think clearly. That's where our rational thinking comes in place. That's where I can listen, where I can be more open. And then we have the amygdala, the back part of our brain. That's when, if I feel threatened, if I feel I'm unsure and I need to protect myself, I immediately go there. And we have a protective mechanism in our body. So in our mind, if I feel that I need to protect myself, I will immediately put a wall, go to that part of my brain. Different hormones are secreted. We call it, as you know, an amygdala hijack. You can't listen there. It's a way.
Yeah, I understand that the hormones actually kind of disconnect the prefrontal cortex so that it's just not able to function. And I know that feeling when I get triggered. I get it goes down my spine. I can just feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up.
I ask my clients, you need to recognize how you get triggered. You need to know when you're going into that state, and then we can, I can give you tools. What do you do then? Because when you're hijacked, once that's the part of the brain you're using, that's when I see people escalating and starting to yell at each other or stop listening to each other. It happens in 30 seconds. I've seen it happen. And that's that's a waste of time discussion, because you are not able to listen. The other side is incapable of listening. You don't even know exactly how to express it in a way that the other side might be able to listen. It just becomes, I'm defending myself, you're defending myself, I'm going to defend even better, and you're going to defend even better. Not the place to be. And it's really easy to get there. So
sounds like a family courtroom.
But you have it in all relationships. I've had it two people in front of me, and I'm like, wow, I wish I could have filmed you. Did you see how in 30 seconds, because somebody said that the other person felt attacked, you changed the way you were communicated, and the conversation that was useful stopped being useful.
Right.
And what I want people to understand is this happens to everybody. So start paying attention. When do you get triggered? You say you feel it in the back. I feel it in my stomach. Others feel their hearts going up. Others feel their heads becoming red.
Right.
How do you start recognizing it? So when it happens, you know that this is not a time to continue the discussion. And then what are you supposed to do when this happens?
So I tell my clients, let's take a break. Let's maybe need to walk around the block, or maybe just don't respond for 24 hours, right? We need to settle that amygdala down and get the prefrontal cortex working again.
I just say, you need to call in and say, well, this is getting really emotional. We're actually all going to take a bio break. We need a break.
Right.
Can we take 3 breaths? Even just 3 good breaths gives us time for our mind and our body physiologically to come back to a place where we can have the conversation. It depends how much you're triggered.
Right.
Start recognizing, because when you're triggered, you need that time out. You need to take a break. You need to, that if you're getting really triggered by an email or a text your ex is sending, as you say, don't respond. Wait 24 hours until you can respond from a place where you really know what you want to respond. And it's not an emotional response that's not going to get you anywhere.
What I've seen sometimes help with clients is to try to identify what it is, what the threat is. And once they're able to, I don't always get it right, but once the client gets it right, it seems to just bring down that amygdala, and they're able to move forward through that. Is that a technique you use? Or?
Yes, I actually work with a lot of my clients to understand not only how they can communicate, but what is triggering them so that they can change the way they're communicating.
Right.
Being triggered is something that is harder not to get triggered for, but stopping how you behave or communicate after that, that's something that is more in our control. So right. Yes, absolutely. You need to understand why you're being triggered. I almost even say and expect it. They're going to say something around that. So when it comes, instead of getting mad, it's like, and here it comes. But now I'm going to deal with it differently.
Right. And I think that's a really good advice. If you can imagine or sort of role play it and say, imagine this might come up, this might be said. How am I going to respond? That's for me, that helps. I can, if I sort of prepared for that trigger, then I can not let it have as big an impact on me.
Absolutely. And let's talk about couples, that they're separating. You probably know what triggers you. What are they going to say again and again that just really gets to you?
Absolutely.
They're going to say it. They're just saying it. Now that I'm expecting it, I have more control on where we take the conversation and the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This next slide is very interesting. We make our own conclusions. What do you mean here? We make our own conclusions about what? I don't understand.
Oh, this to me is the most important slide that I want people to take. What happens in a conversation? The previous slide, we talk about bioreactions. So we talked about the reactions physiologically that happen in my body that I have no control over.
Right.
The hormones in my body, the part of the brain that's being used. And then we also have no control on how I'm feeling. Feelings I don't control them. I control what I do with them and how I react, but I don't control if I'm feeling frustrated and angry or upset or sad or happy or connected or joyful. Those are just feelings that come. So we need to know that somebody said something, which will start a biological reaction in my body, which will have feelings come up, which then will trigger my mind to think about things. Oh, they always do that. Oh, that means I'm not a good person. Oh, that means really I'm going to lose everything. And then I start getting more scared. And then my beliefs come into place. What are my values? If I need to be respected or need to be seen or need to be truthful and they're not doing that, that triggers even more things about myself. That brings me to interpret whatever they were saying with a different meaning, creating different assumptions. And by the time it gets into my brain, I have a different conclusion or my own conclusion. We really make things up. People tell me that's not true. It's subjective. And I'm like, yes, it's subjective. And we also add a subjective component.
Right.
Whatever is happening, it's actually a mixture of the objective and subjective component. And I think this is very important to understand. It's not because you're a good person and I'm a bad person or the other way around. This is the way our mind works. This is how we listen. And by the time we put it in our brains, we have put all these lenses. I like people to think about all these layers that somebody said something, and in microseconds, I do all these things that I'm talking about, and then that's what I heard. And that's why people say, but that's not what he said. And the other people understood something completely different. It's because we pass all these layers until we hear what we're hearing. And we do this, we like it or we don't. And I want people to understand, many people think, oh, they're doing it on purpose. They're understanding something else on purpose. And I want them to know, I don't believe it's on purpose. Yes, they're understanding whatever is that they need to understand, but you are doing the same thing because this is something that we all do.
Right. It's unavoidable, inescapable, and it can mess things up, right?
It makes things very complicated, but like we were talking before, it's also a protective mechanism because, this also helps us to decide in the moment and to make choices without having to think about every choice and about everything that I hear with so much emphasis. I just hear it, I do something about it, and I keep around my day. But it gets complicated when I'm doing this in things that are really important to me or the other person or the relationship, because we are miscommunicating without even knowing that we're doing it. Right.
So what my intention is totally different. It may be completely different because you're putting in meaning to what you're hearing, right? You're adding an interpretation, and that's when we need to check in, right, with our interpretations. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, what I'm saying is that's why a lot of people say, well, that wasn't my intention. And I'm like, reality, it doesn't matter what your intention was. It matters what's the impact that you have. And what we're talking about here is what are the things in my control so that my intention may become my impact as well. And why is it that, well, I didn't mean it that way. Why did I interpret it wrongly? They always have, they're always trying to take things out of context. And I'm like, well, because those are their lenses. So how can you say it differently that might help the other person interpret it in the way that was your intention?
Right.
At the end, we want to make sure that they're getting what we're saying in a way that's how we wanted it to be interpreted.
Right.
Does this make it clearer? Because I really think this slide is a change maker to understand in the way that we communicate.
Right. Yeah. And then there are certain relationship toxins, and we do all of these things every day. It seems like blaming and being defensive and acting in a way of contempt and stonewalling. I don't use stonewalling very often, but blaming and defensiveness, those are all things that we naturally do. I think it's to protect ourselves, isn't it?
It is to protect ourselves because remember, our mechanism is we need to survive. Our mind and our body was created in a way that if we think there's a threat, I'm going to do everything in my power to survive. And when somebody says things that trigger me, that make me feel vulnerable and out of control, I will do whatever it takes without even knowing about it to survive. It is a survival mechanism. But I just put it here because I want people to understand that from the other side, these are things that really make relationships complicated, that are easily misunderstood, and that trigger the other person really easily. When you start blaming and talking about, you always do that, and you never do that, and we talk like that all the time. If we could talk, what I need from you is that actually this behavior change. Oh, sounds very different that you always, whatever we want to talk there. I would really like it if this behavior could change. That's what blaming does. Blaming means the other person is going to defend themselves. You're attacking me, you're generalizing, I will defend myself. And you and I will do that. This goes exactly to defending myself. If you attack me, I will defend myself because I need that. I need to protect myself.
Yes.
But what are harder to understand is the contempt. People think that, just this humor that just makes fun of you, but it's not really making fun of you. It is. It's a toxin. It's perceived as a toxin. You may not think it isn't and want to make fun out of it. It isn't. The other person will perceive it as an intention of wanting me to put yourself down. And the stonewalling, a lot of people do this. They withdraw. They say, well, you know what? I'm not going to talk to you. And they think, you know what? That way I'm not adding to the fire of our conflict. But for the other side, you are adding fire to the conflict. Mm-hmm. That's why when we say, you need to take time away, you need to say it. This is time away. I'll come back to the conversation and I'll stop talking to you for 48 hours or for a week, which happens a lot in relationships.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned the other day in a conversation, if you have to take a break, but also say when you're going to come back. That's important.
Because if I only take a break and we never come back, it can be interpreted, and this is what we're trying to stop, these interpretations, as withdrawal, as I'm just cutting communication, as I'm going to show you by not talking to you. So if I take a time out and we both say, you know what, this is not going anywhere. Okay, I need some time out. I'll bring the subject back again if it's necessary. Right. And then we have other types of conversations, and we know that we're taking a time out because we can't have the conversation, not because I'm ignoring you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm thinking about it in my own life. I've had relationships where the person, when we're in conflict, will leave the room. And boy, that drives me crazy. It makes it worse.
But what would happen if this person says, before they leave the room, and say, I can't hear you anymore. I'm incapable of listening. I need some time for myself. I'll come back. Yeah. Would that help you?
Yeah, absolutely. And if they said, let's do this tomorrow or Friday or whenever, then I would be like, okay, we got a plan. Okay. That totally would trigger me less.
Especially now that you know that if that person is so triggered that they're not going to be able to listen to you, you now know that it would actually be a waste of your time to continue the conversation because they are physiologically incapable of listening.
Right, absolutely. And now you've got some ideas for us as to how to make communication work. And you start with clarity, listening.
Yes. So I chose all of this because there are things in your control, and I'm going to try to give you very specific tools. Okay. I could spend the whole hour in each one of them. So we're just going to go really fast for them. And you can email me and I'll send you more information. But these ones are the ones that I chose: clarity, listening, assumptions, perception, and we can't forget nonverbal communication. And let me walk you through them and why I chose them. Okay. Yeah. So if I start with clarity, here is the most important one. If you can go to the next slide. I really like this quote because I like the part that I need to accept the things that I cannot change. And in relationships, you cannot change the other side. When I hate me for this, I know people are going to say, so why are we even here? You can change the communication pattern. You can change the relationship. You can change how you feel in the relationship and how you behave in the relationship, but you can't change the other side. You can change the uncertainty of a separation or a divorce. It's so much uncertainty and there's so much emotions. We can't change the uncertainty of the past year and COVID. It's like, I don't see in Canada when this is going to end. It's starting to be crazy. Those are the things I don't change. So, if I could accept the things I cannot change, if I had the courage to change the things that I can change, which takes courage because it takes changing myself. And the most important one is also in the wisdom to know the difference. I like to say sometimes we have this wall in front and people go, but I want to do that. And I'm like, forget the wall. Can I give you a ladder and you can go up? Can we walk to the side? Can we dig a hole? Can you turn around? The wall is going nowhere. Let's look for different solutions.
Yeah. So clarity is so important. And in this slide, you say both internal and external. What do you mean by that?
This is what I mean by that. Internal means if you don't know what you need and what you need to ask for, how is the other person supposed to understand? I did communication coaching for a couple that was having problems. I only worked with a woman, and she told me once, well, I want my partner to acknowledge me more. And I'm like, okay, so you want to feel acknowledged? Yes. And I said, so what behaviors do you want to tell your husband that would make you feel that way? Oh, I don't know. He should know. And I'm like, how is he supposed to know? If you don't know how you feel acknowledged and what you want him to do, why is he supposed to know? And there was silence in the room. And this is the internal clarity. I can't make the other person understand something that I haven't taken the time to understand. Can you say it in a different way because this triggers me? You need to know what triggers you. Maybe they can, and maybe they will. But if we don't know ourselves, then we can't change the other. So I always say the work starts with the relationship with yourself and knowing yourself better. It's a very important step. It's not therapy of years. It can be done in just a few sessions. It can be done by yourself. But you need to know what you want to say before you can clearly communicate it to the other person.
So, but communication involves two people. So you said you sometimes work, or you often work with just one person. Does that has an impact on the communication with only one person? Has this sort of work with you?
Yes, 100%. So I work also with two people, both partners but I also work individually with one, because sometimes when I'm working just with one person, that person feels more safe to really do the introspective work that is necessary. What triggers me? What do I need? How do I want to say it? How am I saying some things that might be triggered that I'm not even paying attention to? How can I say it differently? What are my boundaries? What do I need to say no to? This is work that we need to do individually. It is amazing how if I change, the other person will change. And this is because if I learn how not to be triggered and communicate differently, then the other person might not be as triggered because I'm doing it differently, who will then start behaving differently that doesn't trigger me. And I'm able to stop the loop of conflict by just changing myself. Nobody likes to be in these uncomfortable, conflict-driven relationships. They're draining. They're emotionally endless. They keep us awake at night. People will follow when I take the lead. I'm not talking about extreme cases, okay, where you just have to never talk to that person ever again because, he's abusive, he hits you, or that type of things. This is more on the main type of relationships that I'm talking about. Right. You change and you learn how to communicate what you need and you learn how to say it and how to listen, you will change your relationships.
So that's interesting. It starts internally before we express ourselves externally, right? We need to have that clarity of what we need and what's important to us, and then we can we can try to share that with someone else. Is that kind of right? Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And you have to believe me, the change in the relationship changes completely. And I want to give our listeners the idea that, yes, you control more than you think. You don't control the other person. You don't change the other person, but you change the relationship and you change how you feel.
This is very practical, this slide. These are the things we need to ask ourselves before we, do that internal work before we speak, right?
Right, because sometimes, if you need to know if this is worth having a difficult conversation over. Sometimes it isn't. We can have difficult conversations or, deep conversations about everything in our relationship. Some things I just have to let them go. So my first question is this something that is important to you? Can you let it go? Because if you can really let it go, and I don't mean it push it under the rug and then remind the partner of something that happened 3 years later, that's not letting it go. I mean, letting it go because it really is not important to me. I had a conflict with my sister-in-law once, and 3 years later, she told me something, and I'm like, I don't even remember. What do you mean 3 years ago? Please, you should have told me 3 years back. I would have done something about it. I would have said, I'm sorry. She kept it for 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard that called your ammunition pouch. You just stick something in there to hold it until you need to use it. And that's not healthy, right? We need to keep that ammunition pouch empty.
Completely empty. It's a waste of your energy and it's a waste of the other person's energy because there's nothing you can do about it. If you're going to use that ammunition on me and it happened 3 years ago, 5 years ago, useless. What am I supposed to do about it? We're talking about having a better life today and moving forward to a better life. And the last part about clarity is, who do you want to show up? What do you want to tell the other person? And can we work so that you show up being yourself? I work with people that say, I need to do something because I'm starting to behave in a way that it's not me anymore. I
Right.
didn't like myself in this relationship. And I want to give them the power back that we have to work so that you can be yourself in whatever circumstances, doesn't matter how difficult it is.
Right. Wow.
This
And
internally. And then when you're going to say it, be specific. If I tell, my husband laughs, but I say, if I say, somebody, it needs to be done. And he looks at me, it needs to be done, or do I need to do it? I'm like, no, you need to do it. And can you do it today? So it's become a laughter in my house, because what does it mean it needs to be done? The trash needs to go out. Dear, can you take the trash out right now before we sit down for dinner? Very different. Okay.
Right.
Talk about the problem, the behavior, not generalizing about the person. This will help the other person not to put the wall up and have to start defending themselves, what we talked about a few minutes ago.
Right.
If you can talk about you're always, instead of saying you're always late, being late really causes a conflict. Oh, that's something different. It's a different conversation. And the last one, which I wish I had more time, is if it's really, really important to you, then make sure to ask the other person, can you tell me what I understood? I want to make sure I explained myself correctly. Because a lot of times, remember, they will remember other things.
They'll put meaning into it through their own lenses, and maybe it's not the meaning you intended. So it makes so good advice to ask them to clarify. What did you hear me say? And
these are all things in our control.
Yeah. The next one is about active listening, and we're not very good at listening, are we?
I like to ask people, we had them here. I would ask people, so do you really listen? Do you think you're a good listener? And most people will say, yes, I am. And then I want to tell them, you know what? Most of us are actually not good listening, because good active listening is hard work. It's a muscle that we constantly need to train ourselves, that it has to be much more, we're present there, and it's something that we don't do. And there's different levels of listening. I don't think we have time today to go into all the different levels of listening, but you need to know that most of us listen to respond. We are listening so that I can immediately start responding to what you're saying. Not to really listen to what you have to say and what's important and why are you telling me that and what other information is there. I'm listening to respond. And that doesn't help, because good listening, one that will help our communication, is if I can forget about everything else and just start being curious. Why are we saying that? Why is that important to me? It sounds so illogical to me. Can you explain it? Can you help me understand it? You will be amazed how the conversation changes.
Sometimes in mediation, I will do an exercise called mirroring, where I ask the one party to repeat back what they've heard the other say without responding, without defending, without making a judgment. And boy, it can be really hard for some people to do that. But they start to change their pattern a little bit, because they have to really listen carefully so they can repeat back what they've heard.
And isn't it amazing how hard it is for a lot of people? I do the same exercise, and I'm always amazed. It really is hard for people to take away their judgment, to take away how they want to respond, and just mirror back to what they listened. That's how we can tell we don't really listen.
Yeah.
Going back to practical tips, because we said we wanted this to be very practical.
Yes.
I had people tell me that they can multitask. And I'm here to tell you guys that if you are multitasking, you are not actively listening. Right. I invite people to go, because I started paying attention when I started this work many years ago, how much I would be with my kids going, yeah, I have no idea what they were talking about. I try to do it less and less, or I was thinking about something else and yes, right now. Or, I do some work also in workplaces, and they have their computers on, they have their phones on. I'm like, what a waste of time. You could have this meeting in a quarter of a time if you would stop multitasking. Our brains are not wired to multitask. So if you want to make the other person feel heard, that you're listening to them, not agreeing, just hearing them, just acknowledging what they're saying, stop multitasking.
Right.
Start saying less and asking more. Boy, this works. I called silence for a few seconds our best friend. And I learned, when I had teenage kids that are older now, to just think about myself, Claudia, just your mouth, just don't say anything. Because remember, for the other person to give us important information, they have to go inside and think, do I want to tell them? What is it that I want to say? What really is important to me? And if I just keep on saying and saying and saying, I'm not going to get any useful information. And listening is about getting useful information so that we can do something about it.
Yeah, I find even if I'm not multitasking, my brain is still so busy thinking about all the other things. One little technique that I use, you might laugh at this, but what I'll do is when I'm wanting to really listen to someone, is I'll repeat in my head what they've just said, so that I silence those other things that are going on in my brain, because I'm hearing it twice, and it just it seems to work for me.
I think that's a great idea. I do a lot of things when I'm catching myself, thinking about other things. Like, Claudia, come back. You're supposed to listen. Come on, come back and listen.
Come back.
It takes 30 seconds, and it's a little bit of going back in there. But I remind myself that no, if I'm here, I want to be more present and I want to listen. So I do that inside conversation to know that it's not that easy to listen. I really have to make that effort in doing it.
Yeah, and you talk about paraphrasing. That's really great. If you say, okay, I'm going to really try to summarize or loop or paraphrase, then you have to be listening if you're doing that, right?
And it really helps, because then the other person can correct themselves. So I like to say, I want to make sure I understood yourself correctly. Is this what you wanted me to understand? So it's not that they said it wrongly. I'm going to put it on me so they don't have to defend themselves. Remember, I want to create an impact where we're having a conversation. So I want to make sure I understood you correctly. Is this what you wanted me to understand? You will be surprised how many times the other side will say, no, not exactly. What I wanted you to understand is this and this and this. Fantastic. They feel heard, and now they're offering more information, which now I can interpret it in the way that they wanted me to hear it. And I didn't agree. I just acknowledged that, is this what you wanted me to understand? Now we can have a conversation. Paraphrasing is our friend.
Absolutely. I agree completely. And open-ended questions.
Those are harder to do. People say, am I supposed to learn all of this? So I like to say, just be curious. Put a curious hat on. If you did the wrong question, no worries. They'll let you know. They won't answer. So you'll do the next one, because you don't want to become so tense that you have to think about everything you do. But if you're really curious and you really want to understand, why is that person having that position? What are they trying to tell me? What is important to them? Then you'll get the information that you want.
Yeah, and listen to understand, not to respond. I think that's really sage advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But in checking in, because, assumptions, we might get it wrong.
I will say we will get it wrong most of the times in things that are really important to the other person. So I just found this slide. It's not mine. I'm not going to even repeat what is there. When you assume that's what you make of yourself.
Right.
If you are finding yourself saying, but they should know. How, I work with people say, but I was married for 20 years. They should know by now that that's something that, I don't like. Well, if they're doing it, it's because they don't really know what it means to you. Well, that's the way, that's the way it is. That's how they do it. If you find yourself assuming, stop and ask yourself.
And when people have gone through a divorce, their communication in most cases is not very healthy. And so they need to make a change. They need to say, this didn't work. Otherwise, we wouldn't be getting a divorce. So we need to start doing things differently, which is one of them. I think the really good advice is stop assuming and clarify what you understood and the way you wanted it in both ways. Make sure you understand the other person and that they understand you.
Absolutely. And this is especially important, in those couples that, although they're going to be divorced, if they have children, they're actually going to have to continue to communicate with each other forever.
Yeah.
So how do you make that communication, for the sake of your kids and for your sake, something that it's easier? All these tools are part of what you can do to You don't have to love each other. You don't even have to like each other, but you can make your life so much easier for you and your kids if you once again learn to communicate.
Right. And post separation, this is an opportunity to recreate your relationship and do it in a way for the benefit of your children. And your focus is just on being able to communicate for the sake of the children. That's a good purpose.
For the sake of the children and for the sake of myself. I need to be able to move on. I need to be able to be happy again, and we start doing all these tools, even the separation process can become a little bit easier. It's still going to be horrible. It's still going to be difficult. This is a change in life that is huge, but where can I gain control again, feel better with myself, and create a different daily reality for me?
Yeah. You said it's difficult, and I think it's even more difficult right now during this pandemic, because divorce is all about uncertainty. People don't know what their life will be like, their relationship, their identities. And then on top of that, we're all in this pandemic, which is all about uncertainty again. It adds another layer to it. And boy, I think people are going through a divorce just need to give themselves a break. This is tough. This is really tough.
This is really, really tough. And we need to understand that our coping mechanism, when there's so much uncertainty, has become irrational. I hear people saying that you can do this, but you can't do that for COVID. And I'm supposed, this is okay, but this isn't. And when you really try to understand it, it's irrational. It's a coping mechanism to feel a little bit more in control and safe. And I can't convince you that this is the right way to do it or this is the wrong way to do it. I see it. I have university students, and the fights they're having in their houses with their friends would not have happened 6 months ago.
Right.
The coping mechanism of each one has become so different that we need to be even kinder to us and to others.
Yeah.
It's hard. Uncertainty is tough on us. We like to feel a little bit more in control, and we don't have that right now.
Yeah. We need to be kind to ourselves and others. That's good advice. I like that. That's so good. Perspectives. I love this. Is this guy looking forward, or is he looking to the side? I can't decide. That's amazing.
I'm sorry I couldn't give credit. I just found this in the internet. I wanted to see who they're from, and I could never find it. So somebody did a great job. And here is the important one. There is more than one truth. Right. I get a lot of kickback when I say this, and people say that's not true. And again, I'm not talking about abusive war, physical abuse, that type of relationships. That's not it. But in general, there's more than one truth, because we adapted to our subjective way, and then it becomes my way of seeing it, my perspective. And there's more than one perspective. So is it turning to the side or to the front? Let's give them another ones. It really depends where you stand.
Yes, that's right.
It can look fantastic or it can look horrible. Depends where you are.
Right.
What happens to us?
And is that a 6 or is it a 9?
No, I use that example a lot with the people that I'm working on, because I say, look, we could argue forever that you see a 6 and I see a 9, and you will be right and I will be right. And we can stay in that position forever and not move, because you're right and I'm right. Yeah. But actually, if we could have a conversation and move the page around, then we would know it's a circle with a little thing on the side.
Right.
And we will understand that, oh, so can I get curious? Why do you say it's a 6? And what really is there? And how do we work with it now? But if not, we're not going to communicate. We're just going to get stronger and stronger in our position. And there's more than one way of seeing things.
Right. Yeah. And I imagine a lot of the work that you do is helping clients to be open to seeing those different perspectives. Is that right?
Yes. I help them not to agree with another perspective. I'm not asking that from anybody, but just to acknowledge that there might be a different perspective. And is there a 2% truth in what the other person's seeing that might be useful to us? 2%. We're not talking about agreeing to everything. Can it be different? Yeah. I love how they did this. 4 or 3. I don't even know how they did this.
I don't know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. This one is incredible. I'm going to play this video on the screen, and I see 2 giraffes. I think that's what we've got here, Claudia. Clearly 2 giraffes.
But I've seen this 100 times, but it may be an elephant.
You
Depends
see an
on
elephant. How is that possible?
and it only took me to walk a little bit around and see, well, what, how else could my eye see it? Not only do you see it
Now
differently.
we're back to two giraffes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
I don't think we need to talk more about it. I think it explains itself.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So you need to put yourself in another person's shoes.
Which
How
is
do you
very
do that?
It's very hard to do when you're so angry and when you're
Right.
so frustrated. So I may not ask you to do that. You know, I do have clients, sometimes I ask them, you know, say something, now go around. How did you hear it from the other side? And they'll say, oh no, that was more aggressive than what I wanted it to be. Then we walk back to this side. Well, how can you say it? How does it sound from the other side? Just be a little more kind that there might be another perspective, and try to see especially how you're saying it, how you're communicating. Does it sound the same way if you were on the other side? Or can you say it in a different way to have the impact that I want? And one
Right.
of the things that really help there is what we call in our world the I statements. Anything you can start with, I believe, I need this, I see this, will help the other person not start to defend themselves.
Right, because when you say you, then people feel attacked, and that amygdala, we know what happens there.
It doesn't even matter what you said after the you. I only hear the you. I'll defend myself.
Yes, because you feel threatened.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but if it's it's all just sharing your own truth, your own perspective, your own experience, and how things are impacting you, and somehow that's less triggering, right?
Absolutely, that's the way to go.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back here.
We're almost there.
Nonverbal communication.
We could have another talk about it. This is like the silence, at the beginning. Just know that people only hear, I don't remember the number, but I think it's, it's not the words that we remember, it's how you made us feel. It's what you said without words. And that's part also of the work that I do with people is like, well, you're saying this, but you're saying it in this way. There's something here that is not going. Because I could say, I am not mad at you.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you said. The tone of voice just told me that you were mad at me. So say whatever you want to say. The nonverbal communication, which is the tone of voice, how fast I say it, the way I say it. Am I looking at you? Am I saying I'm not mad, but my eyes are crossed and I'm looking like this, but I'm hearing you? Well, you're not really. Yeah. So it's not only the words and the way we communicate, it's how we say it and in the way we say it. And this is getting really hard when we're not seeing too many people and we're doing everything on Zoom. I have a lot more work because it's harder. Because we're not able to see that nonverbal communication. But please pay attention to that. If you're sending a text, if you're sending, an email, they're not going to read it like you want them to say it. It's impossible to know if it should have 5 exclamation marks or 2 exclamation marks. If it's bold, then it means I'm angry. If it isn't bold, it doesn't go through. You're going to have more conversations because it just is. And conflict and disagreement, let's talk another full one. How do we deal when you're actually in there? This is more of other things that are in your control, but know that the best of relationships have disagreement and have conflict, and there's ways to deal with it. Absolutely. In your next cycle, in your next relationship, you are going to have conflict. You are going to have disagreement. The best of relationships have conflict and disagreement.
Right. And so it's a matter of learning from people like you. And I appreciate you sharing your expertise today, learning how we can better communicate and work our way through these conflicts so that we can get on with life, right?
That's exactly what we need to do. There's a lot of things that we can do, and that is what we were talking about. How to create not a perfect relationship, but a relationship that permits me to be myself, to feel better, and to enrich our lives. And if we're separating, then finish it in a way that permits you to move forward and not to have to carry that this didn't work out and the things that didn't work out, but what can you learn and what can you do differently moving forward?
Right. So summarize, you've given us so much great information, but you've really pulled it all together in this slide, Claudia. This is really amazing.
And let me say, I chose that photo in purpose because a little bit of humor goes a long way.
For sure.
Communications are messy. They're fantastic. They fascinate me. That one of the things that has been shown is people that have better and fulfilled lives are those that have positive relationships and connections in their life. Is the number one indicator of how happy we feel in our lives. But they're messy. They're complicated. A little bit of humor, of laughing at ourselves and laughing at the other and laughing at the situation. I know it's hard, but it goes a long way because sometimes it's just out of my control.
Absolutely.
So I did use that picture on purpose. So I want to remind everybody. So one is the clarity. Make sure you know what you want to say. If you don't know it, if you don't know what triggers you, if you don't know what's important to you, if you don't know, like, that client that I talked about, what behavior the husband is supposed to do or what you're expecting, there's no way the other person's going to do. So please, get in touch with me or with somebody else, do the work. And then when you're saying something, say it as specific as you can, so that there's less room for interpretation. I won't tell my husband the garbage needs to go out, but dear, can you take the garbage out tomorrow? Listening will enrich your relationships, will enrich you. You will get so much more information if you're willing to listen. And this is, during the separation, if you can understand what's happening in the other person, what is really essential for them, what is triggering them, and you have some control enough not doing that, it's on your own benefit. Because then you can move forward easier and you can have the conversation also about what you need that is essential to you.
Right. And the next one is just eliminate the assumptions, right? That's asking if you've got it right and checking in to make sure they've got your message right, because assumptions just get us in trouble.
If you're assuming and you find yourself saying they should know, you're assuming. Don't. Right. They're just our enemy. Right. And then we worked about perspectives. And there's two things in perspective. We talked about how we see it differently and the lenses until I hear it differently. So there's your perspective and my perspective. But it's also that, what about if I can move around in my own perspective? If I can be the one that's seeing two giraffes and I'm willing to take 2 steps to this side and suddenly say, oh, it's an elephant. Maybe I can take 2 steps to the other side. And that's a little bit of what I help my clients do. What other perspectives can you take? What things, still believing and acknowledging what is important to you, can you take to create the impact you want in the relationship, to be able to move forward and change what you want to change? And nonverbal is nonverbal. Doesn't matter what I say. If I don't mean it, the other person will know.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
And especially in written communication. Please, if you feel triggered by an email that, I had a client that said, I finally learned when his ex would send a text message, he would be sure not to respond in 24 hours, because that would invite him to be able to respond in a way where he had more control. Right. It's really important. And the last one is, if you can understand what the other person needs from you, and it's something that you can give them, give it to them. It will help them to trigger themselves and maybe be willing to have another conversation. Sometimes there are things that we can do that don't really matter to us, that we just don't do them. And sometimes it can be helpful. It really does help.
Right. Yeah. Just to try to understand the other person and meet their needs. They're more likely to meet your needs if you make an effort to do that, right?
If it's needs that you're okay with. I'm not saying it's something that you're totally in disagreement with. But if it's something that you can acknowledge and it doesn't really cost you anything emotionally, I would say do it. It would really help you. So we gave them a lot of information.
But now we've got it. We can do it. We don't have to try anymore. Is that right?
I thought you were going to forget to put that one. So no. So I actually come from a line of, I have a lot of divorces in one side of my family, but in one side of my family, if I can tell you the story, I come from a line of no divorces in 4 generations.
Wow.
And my grandmother would make us all get married with there's her band. And right after the ceremony, she would take the wedding bands away. And I've always been curious about, okay, what was it that, they're not magic, but what is there that somehow in this side of my family, we've had good marriages? And I think what was not said, but was understood, is that relationships are ongoing work. We change, the other person changes. We need to constantly be changing, and they're not perfect. We are going to have to accept that there's going to be conflict, that there's going to be disagreement, and to deal with it. And then to continue, and knowing that we play a role, and then continue to work on them.
Yeah.
Relationships are hard. Relationships with exes are going to be hard, but they can be managed. And your next relationship, for the people that are hearing us, is also going to have its problems, but there's a lot of things that you can do about it. And I also really like, we know what Gottman says, there is no one right relationship. We create the right relationship.
Right.
We're not perfect. The other side is not perfect either. Our relationship is going to be imperfect. It just has to be able to work with us.
Right. Well, thank you so much for today. You've really offered so much great advice. Here's contact information for you. You're everywhere. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with everyone today. And I really appreciate it. And I think you really contributed to people communicating better.
Thank you. And I do want to invite everybody. I write a blog twice a month on topics of communication, always on things that are in our control to improve how we feel in relationships. And I would really invite people just to subscribe. And if you heard this, you can just let me know, and I'll send you an infogram with all the information that we talked about. And I invited people to be in contact, and we all need support. So thank you for having me. It has been my absolute pleasure having this conversation with you.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye.